Chapter 13, Combat Control School Tactics. After the land navigation phase, we quickly moved into tactics. I welcomed the week of classroom training, even the pit. I was still in disbelief how hard the land navigation phase was. We sent 2 guys back to Lackland because they failed on the retake. One guy was removed from training because he pulled out his GPS on the retake and was quietly removed after the course was over. The speed of the Combat Control School train was now at full speed, like it could derail at any moment. We crammed our heads full of information about tactics in the classroom. We learned drills like a sports team in the comfort of just wearing our BDUs without all the gear. They even let me wear my running shoes because my feet looked horrible. In the tactics phase, we would use comms, land nav, and our new tactics skill. And we would be back in the woods the following week applying it all together. The instructors would act as the enemy as we moved as a team through the woods. Even when we slept, they would be after us. It didn't seem like we'd get much sleep in that phase either. Out in the field, we would use actual M4 rifles and M9 pistols, but they would have blanks in them, not actual bullets. We were responsible for keeping our magazines loaded and treating them like live weapons. If we received a safety violation, we would more than likely be removed. Practicing drills and moving around was a tricky scenario in a setting where someone could be seriously injured or hurt with live weapons. The drills were set up to get a small group of special operators out of a live fire situation as quickly as possible. Special operators are usually a very small group. They are not used for large operations. Instead, they are used for sneaking in and out of an objective unnoticed. If a firefight begins, they use a tactical way of getting the hell out of the area. All that was where our drills came into play. At the point of unwanted enemy contact, we would split into 2 groups. One group would face the enemy in a line, down on the ground or on one knee. The other group runs like hell, then plants down on the ground while the other group turns and runs. It is a simple process, but the instructors watch us like a hawk, checking for where we shot so we were accurate. The opportunity for shooting your teammate is high. In the woods, it would be more confusing and chaotic. We practiced over and over again in a parking lot by the schoolhouse. Back out on the woods again on Fort Bragg, the scenario was second nature. Face full of camo, lots of heavy gear, and a little sleep. But as I look back on land navigation, even that looked easier than what we were getting into during tactics. Any potential time for sleep or resting seemed to vanish. Even at night, we would have shift for watching the camp, watching out for the enemy as we slept. Even if we took a crap, we had to dig a hole with our shovel and try to bury it. No trace of ourselves should have been left behind. It was like survival school on steroids. Before we started the actual mission of navigating and moving to our objectives, we practiced our drills in the woods. It was much harder than in a parking lot, obviously. I had an idea of how to execute the drills from practicing in the parking lot, but with trees and enemy blasting us from somewhere in the brush, it became more confusing and difficult. My head was in my ass a few times, according to the instructors. It felt like when I played basketball. A drill was called and I ran around hoping I'd move correctly. Guys were moving around into their places and I struggled to find mine. I felt like we practiced like an elite sports team. In a way, we did. That evening, the heat of the summer lingered thick in the air as our training continued. We may as well have been in a jungle somewhere. The heat was taking a toll on everybody again, and after a while, you just got tired of being hot and sweating all the time. Our first task after hours of practicing drills in the woods was to move to a mission objective. With all of our gear, we were going to start moving to the objective point at night. It was just a point along the way. The end point would take days of movement to reach. The enemies were all over the woods during our movement through the night, and if we made contact with them, we used our drills to break the contact and get away. In addition to our new skill, we used the skills we had learned up to that point, like using our radios to communicate with each other, navigating to our objective, and of course the skills learned in Hell Week, which was to continue moving no matter how tired we were. After repeating drills all day, immediately after we set the main campsite up, rucking all night on high alert, and setting up camp along the way, we had a lot more to go. Once we arrived, we had to do a rotation in teams of 2 throughout the night. With our magazines, rucksacks, and canteens full, we started our long journey. I didn't feel strong with all the gear on my body, but I was distracted by the darkness of the night and being alert to enemy movement. The first point must have been only 10 kilometers away, but it took us until 02:30 that morning to finally reach it. The silence of our walk was deafening, only broken by the occasional smartass remark or a question about our route. I walked in a stupor, letting some of the guys do the navigating, and others kept their eyes locked in specific directions. The silence was broken by a flashing light and loud gunfire. Yelling and screaming cut through the dark, sticky air. It would have normally been a time for panic and chaos, but our practice kicked in and the drills made sense. We did the drills without much thought, as having time to think in these scenarios would almost certainly mean death. The attacks seemed to happen over and over. Our adrenaline kept us awake and alert. Without the attack of the enemy, the route would have still taken a while. We were in thick, thorny brush a lot of the time. The various terrain was interesting when trying to disengage from our attackers. When we finally reached the objective that night, the night was quiet and nobody said much of anything. As I sat still only for a few minutes, I had to battle myself to stay awake. The day and weeks before were catching up with me. I had some grizzly mint in my mouth as a morale boost. I wanted to lie on my back and turn my brain off. I had the chance for an hour or so before someone tapped me on the forehead for my turn to watch. I wanted to break his wrist. I heard the occasional crack of twigs in the woods and my heart would beat a little faster. But my gut told me we would be safe for the night, as the instructors had to sleep too. A1C Michaels, the other guy standing watch, was sitting so still I could barely make out his silhouette. He was a hunter back home, so I thought he enjoyed standing watch while the rest of the guys tried to get any sleep they could. All we had was a poncho covering us and our gear. And like Hell Week and the entire course, our weapons stayed within arm's reach and our BDUs were on. In the event of an attack, the idea was to grab the poncho, gear, and get out of the area. There was another crackle in the woods that alerted Michaels. He stood up slowly and walked over to me. He seemed concerned. He had a much bigger water chew in his mouth than I did. "You see that over there?" He pointed to an area almost pitch black toward the ground. It was very dark. It was country dark, as one of my friends back home would have said. I tried to focus my eyes, and I made out a dark blob on the ground. Was it moving? My heart sputtered in my chest. Michaels was pulling his weapon up. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I saw a glimmer of white. Michaels opened fire, and the sound of the M4 made my ears tickle, as I'm sure it had damaged my hearing a little. I joined him, firing my weapon towards the movement. The instructor on the ground was shooting, and then there was shooting from all around the camp. Guys were scrambling out of sleep, and I was now glad I was awake and ready, not rudely interrupted from a deep sleep by a deafening gunfire. There was another firefight that lit the woods up in a bright light. In the flashes of light, I saw my teammates confused, camo faces as well as the piercing stare of our enemies. Most of us would have been dead. This was not like our drills out in the woods. Instead, it was total chaos. I kept shooting as the team stumbled to shoot back while packing up their shit to run. We were slow to break our contact with them. It was more like a Rambo movie, unloading most of our magazines than a real-world tactical movement from the area. We were going to pay that night in the form of push-ups with our rucks on. The training and tactics was taking a toll on me. Being on high alert, having interrupted sleep, and constantly moving with gear on was starting to break me down again. We finished the enemy chasing us scenarios for a while, and the next objective was to shoot each other. It was the instructors against us. The next morning, we took the barrels off the M4 rifles and replaced them with another one that shot simunition. Instead of real bullets, the M4 was capable of shooting small plastic pellets at a high rate of speed. We wore a face mask and worked on shooting the M4 at moving targets. Early that morning, we moved deep into the woods to play what seemed like a game. There were only 2 rules that I remember. Don't shoot in the face or within 50 feet. It was like an intense game of paintball. Before starting the scenario, we had to suffer some kind of pain. It was the combat control school way. To test our barrels, we handed an instructor our weapon. We turned and walked away from him and waited to be shot in the back. I watched my teammates get shot, and I could see the pain in their eyes. As I turned and walked away, I waited for my shot. I flinched a few times before the plastic bullet hit me in the back. The crack of the M4 sounded, and I immediately felt a piercing pain between my shoulder blades. It hurt like hell. The day started off overcast, but the sun peeked through the clouds later in the afternoon. But the heat remained almost unbearable. The upside to that scenario was that we were not carrying the heavy rucksacks, only our vests, so I felt agile and quick. The sun was shining on one of the older instructors as he shot at me. The glimmer off his mask reflected out of the thick brush area, as I felt the sting in my arms and legs. I aimed and shot him in the face. It was the only shot I had, but I didn't hesitate to shoot him directly between the eyes. Our team later paid for that mistake with arm rotations. Our arms extended to our sides for a long period of time, making big and small circular rotations. It was of course easy at first, but after about 30 minutes my arms felt like they were going to fall off. After a full day of shooting each other, my morale was lifted. But there was more to the day. One of the worst events I can remember in the entire course was an introduction to CS, or riot gas. When we finished our shooting game, we didn't go back to our camp. It was around 1700, so I knew there was more training in store for us. But there were no early release days out in the field. We were led to an open field, a small field in the middle of the woods with green grass, almost like a small pasture, like at my grandfather's 400-acre farm in the hills of Tennessee. There was an instructor doing donuts on one of the Polaris four-wheelers, making a huge dust cloud. When I focused on the middle of the field, I saw several small black canisters lined up in the middle. I heard one of the guys, a setback named Roberts from the previous class, say what they were. "That's riot gas. This is going to suck." For a big, stocky, super strong guy that was on his second round of the entire course, Robert's face showed fear, and that made me concerned. We had been gassed in basic training with a tablet placed in the middle of a room. It was just a small tablet that made my eyes burn and water and made me cough to the point of almost puking. I could see the hesitation in the eyes of A1C Roberts as he was backing away from the area. He was doing the course over again because of land navigation in the previous class, and he seemed to breeze through everything up to that point. We were told to line up in front of the canisters and put our gas masks on. Relieved, I put mine on. The memories of the gas mask flashed in my head. I hated wearing the gas mask. I felt claustrophobic in it, but I gladly put it on to avoid the gas. With our gas mask on, the instructor set off the canisters by our feet. The cans made a hissing sound as thick smoke began to spread and fill the entire area we stood in. When I saw the amount of gas surrounding us, my concern turned to terror. A1C Roberts was one of the strongest guys I'd ever met in my life, but he ran away from the smoke. I knew that we were going to breathe the gas in at some point. As we stood there breathing in our gas masks, I heard an instructor shouting, "This is your introduction to CS gas!" This was the gas used to stop riots and other situations where people were out of control. We were about to breathe it in, not just a little of it from the looks of it, several cans of it. As the smoke cleared, I wanted to follow A1C Roberts and run as far as I could from the field. I wanted to be comfortable. Feelings of self-doubt were intruding my mind. I was fighting my mind, but I could not keep the thoughts out. "Take off your mask!" I was one of the last guys to take the mask off my head. I finally took off my mask. I saw Roberts walking over to the group of instructors with a mask still on his head. He begged and pleaded with them. He said he couldn't do it again. Although Roberts was a class favorite, the instructors showed no remorse. "Roberts, you either get back in there with your team or you quit," they said. Roberts stood there and actually considered his options. Almost through 2 combat control school classes, I thought Roberts was going to walk away. "Get back in there, Roberts!" "I can't," he said again. "You're done, Roberts?" Roberts turned and walked back into the smoke with the team. He had tried his best to work out a deal, but the instructors called his bluff. I gained more respect for the instructors. They may have had their favors, but nobody was getting through the school, cutting any corners. It didn't matter who you were. With our masks off, another line of cans were placed by our feet. I could smell the remains of the strong chemicals that were dissipating around us. I counted 11 green cans. All we had to do was stand there and breathe in the gas. My plan, like everyone else's, was to hold my breath as long as I could. I heard the hiss of smoke coming out of the cans, and I began to smell the familiar chemical smell that would haunt me the rest of the course. In the mission phase, whenever I would catch a hint of the smell, I would abandon any task I was doing and move as far away from the gas as I could. I drew in a breath, not before already catching the sting of potent gas. I coughed a little and my eyes watered. I heard the other guys already coughing and sounded like they were gagging and puking. I started to take shallow breaths, as small as I could. But it didn't matter. The gas intruded my nasal cavity, eyes, and lungs. The burn was intense, causing a massive amount of mucus to run from my nose. I coughed uncontrollably as I felt the stinging get much worse. I started a gag reflex and got ready to puke. I saw other guys running out of the thick smoke. Some guys were crawling, others were on their hands and knees puking. I dropped to my knees, then to my hands. I crawled out thinking at any moment I'd get sick. Once out of the gas, I thought the pain would never go away, but it began to get better within a few minutes. After the gas cleared, it looked like a war zone. A lot of us were on our hands and knees coughing and spitting the traces of gas out of our mouth. Although a few guys did puke, I somehow managed not to. I was stunned, not believing how bad the gas actually was. I thought of World War II and nerve gas. What a horrible way to die. In true combat control school fashion, the event wasn't over. It was another round of cans, but it looked like more, although I didn't count that time. We were ordered back into the center of the field. In the next round, we put our mask back on. When the gas was at its peak, an instructor would grab us and tell us to remove our mask. We then had to say our name, rank, and social security number. It was not much to say, but I knew it seemed like forever. At that time, if someone told me I had to do it again, I'd quit too. Screw my ego and my father, it was hell. The hiss of the can sounded like a poisonous snake. There were several instructors walking among us with masks on. I heard them tell someone in the thick smoke to take their mask off. Get it off! I heard intense gagging as cones tried to begin saying their name. There was a faint cough, then a louder cough. Ah! Then an instructor grabbed my BDUs around the collar. The smoke was so thick that I could barely see him standing in front of me. He grabbed me hard, pulling me face to face with him. Take it off! As I pulled off the mask, the chemical smell made me want to run. I took a deep breath before taking the mask off. Breathe out! I heard his muffled voice say. I refused, but he shook me. Do it! I reluctantly blew out my breath of fresh air. Say it! His voice sounded far away. I waited, but I had to breathe. Uncontrollable coughing and burning overpowered me. A1C I was done. It just wasn't going to come out. I was coughing out of control. I intensified my act. I tried to look like I was going to die. Maybe my acting talent would save me. Say it! The muffled voice seemed irritated. McDonald, for... I gave up and tried to drop to my knees. The instructor pulled me up, but I went limp. He pushed me out of the gas. I dropped to my hands and knees and tried to block out the burning and intense waves of nausea. I dry heaved as I spent those moments hoping for the intense misery to ease up. After another few moments of recovery, we were ordered back in the gas for a class picture. A lot of guys screamed, hoo-yah, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to go back in. I thought of trying to stand on the outer edge of the circle, but I followed the team back to the center and waited again for the hiss of the riot gas. After the riot gas scenario, it was getting dark and not much time to think about what had just happened. We moved back to the camp. We had to convert our M4 rifle barrels back to the original barrel so we could go back to shooting blanks. It was quick and fast-paced, only having a few minutes to change the barrel, grab our gear, and make our way to a helicopter for a fast rope exercise. We had practiced fast roping from the rappel tower, but a real helicopter could be heard hovering in the distance. Like the entire school, putting our weapons back together was done in a rush. The sting and smell from the chemicals still lingered, and I was in a daze. We moved to the sound of a large helicopter hovering in an open field. Fast roping was not a hard concept. We'd practiced going down the side of the rappel tower with our rucksacks on several times already. We'd be going out the door of an actual helicopter with 100 pounds of gear on our backs in just a few minutes. Inside the helicopter, the sound of the rotor was deafening. The side was open, and I could see the open field rushing by, about 20 feet below us. It came to a hover. The instructor was yelling, but I could not hear a word. I saw one of the guys move to the edge, grasp the rope with large leather work gloves, and watch them slide down. It was not as uncomfortable as jumping out of an airplane for me, but I still felt the same kind of butterflies. It was finally my turn and I moved forward. The instructor grabbed my hands and repositioned them and yelled a few curse words I could not even hear. He nodded his head and I went down the rope. I could feel the weight of the ruck accelerating me down toward the ground. I was going to hit hard. As I hit the ground, the speed and weight made me fall back onto my ass. I heard the cracks of gunfire over the loud rotors of the helicopter. It took me a moment to realize it was my gun going off. A sinking feeling, like being busted for fighting downtown, was starting to develop again. I had messed up big time. A safety violation, a major safety violation, had just occurred. I looked down and saw the gun on automatic instead of safe. Damn. How the hell did that happen, I thought. I thought back to putting the barrel back on. I always had the gun on safe. I was good about that. It must have been moved in the haze of taking it apart and reassembling it. I formed up in the tactical security circle we had learned in that phase. Away from the sound of the helicopter, the team captain asked the teams whose weapon went off. I thought maybe no one heard it, but apparently everyone did. "Was that your weapon, McDonald?" "Hoo yeah, it fucking was all I could say. I still had hope that the instructors did not hear the gunfire, because I would certainly be removed for that big of a goof-up. I was becoming dreadfully certain that they must have known. The helicopter sound got faint as it flew away, and we waited in our circle on full alert. We were ordered back to the camp and heard nothing from the instructors about the incident. My hopes got a little brighter. Maybe I was lucky. As we arrived back to the camp, it was late at night, so the area was mostly dark. I felt like I'd got away with something finally. All the shit I'd gone through, I felt the school owed me something. I'd been under an excruciating microscope for weeks. As we gathered our gear for the next event, a guilty feeling emerged about my mistake. How the fuck did that happen? That could only happen to me, I thought to myself. I could picture my father back home shaking his head in disappointment. I saw a movement out at the edge of the woods. At first I couldn't tell if I was seeing things, but as I focused in I saw it was a man in dark clothes. The large dark man moved quietly. It was an instructor. He was coming directly towards me. Before I could process what was going on, the instructor reached out and shoved me to the ground. It was a hard shove that I was not ready for, so I fell on my ass. "That's a safety violation, McDonald." This was not a game they normally played. It wasn't the show of "I'm yelling at you to make you stressed and confused" mind games. That guy was serious. "I've had friends die that way." It was a short, pudgy instructor with a smart mouth who could ruck like an animal. I didn't even say "hoo ya." I knew I was in deep shit. "You're done, McDonald. You're fucking done." I couldn't hide mistakes like I'd learned to do back home. I became good at avoiding trouble by keeping a lot of mistakes a secret at school and at home. I felt strange, like an outcast. The community I'd found to escape the isolation of home was now telling me I was trash. The instructor walked away, shaking his head into the darkness. "What the fuck?" he said. I didn't hear anything else about the incident as we finished tactics, although I could tell the instructors amplified the microscope on me. There was no joking around with me or any small talk. I knew I was on the verge of being removed from the course because they didn't say a word to me. I felt self-conscious and defeated. After we moved on from tactics, the excitement of graduation was in the air, but I was inside of my head and repeating the safety violation over and over in my head. We only had 2 more phases to go before graduating: assault zones, which was setting up a dirt airstrip with panels and lights and communicating with the aircraft to land, and the final field training exercise known as the FTX were coming next. The FTX, a phase where we tied it all together with everything we had learned into simulated practice missions, was known to be the most difficult part of the course. I moved on to the last part of tactics with my team to qualify on the M4 and M9 pistol at the shooting range. We started with the M4 and I did quite well on the target because I was used to shooting a rifle, but the instructors didn't directly speak or engage with me. I made damn sure that I did everything correctly and I didn't even hint at a safety violation. The M9 was a different story because I'd never had an experience with a pistol, only randomly shooting a .357 Magnum a few times back home. The instructors pulled me aside and impatiently gave me a crash course on how to shoot accurately with a pistol. They said no more than they had to. I could feel the distaste and frustration they had with me. As we sat in the classroom going over air traffic control procedures the next day to apply during assault zones, an instructor walked over to me quietly. "You need to go see the Commandant, McDonald," he said with little emotion. I knew it was serious. As I got up to walk down a hallway I'd never been down before, the constant seeking feeling of the course intensified. Many questions ran through my mind. Was it all the LORs I had accumulated? Was it an accidental discharge? Was I getting removed because I was not the right type of guy? The Commandant was an older-looking guy. He looked like he was in great shape and had a full head of gray hair with a fresh military cut. He greeted me, going straight to the point. "McDonald, we feel you need to go through the course again." My world stopped. I couldn't believe what I heard. What the fuck was all I could think. "The accidental discharge is a major safety violation," he said. "Hoo-yah, Sergeant," I said in a weak voice that seemed far away to me. "We just think another run through will help you understand some things." His voice was stern but sympathetic. Every time he spoke, it was like a knife plunged into my gut. I had trouble facing what he was saying. "You can either quit or you can go back to day one of Hell Week." I sat there and looked at him. The thought of quitting seemed like a logical choice. I ran through what I experienced in the hell they called a school. I sat there in silence. I really didn't know what to do. "I know it's a tough decision," he said, breaking the silence. He looked concerned. He knew what the school was like. He knew they needed guys like me, a strong build and a desire to be a combat controller. Before I could even process how to respond, the words came out of my mouth. "Hell with it, I'll do it again," I said. Although I couldn't process going through combat control school all over again, all the time spent being miserable, I was relieved to have a break, to be able to stop and see how far I've come. I miss being me. I was given 3 weeks to take off, and then I could start with the fall class in September. I'd have a chance to go home without the worries I previously had. I could be home and not be financially broke and not worry about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Although the weight of going through the brutal course would be a heavy weight to bear, the freedom of being away from an environment where my every move is analyzed, my performance is judged, and I'm exerting myself to max effort, mentally and physically, every waking hour. I was eager to see how I felt back in my old environment as a changed man. My future was still uncertain in combat control. I knew anything could happen that could end my time in the training pipeline. As I took some time to slow down and take advantage of some rest time, I realized that just walking was painful on my feet and sore legs. I barely noticed how bad my body was during the course.
You're only one. You choose it, don't lose it, don't let confuse it. Only then you'll be gone. Feel like